People flocked at me because I had a reputation already of being quick, aggressive, and good. And now I'm being held to, it feels really nice to make good money. But
George Santos, probably the most criminal, corrupt member of Congress in modern history, has been indicted on 13 federal charges, as we know. Now, recently released tapes of him in an interview with a documentarian that he conducted a few months ago are going to be very helpful to the prosecution. So let's hear in his own words what he says about one of the counts, that he fraudulently applied for unemployment. This goes to the money laundering count as well as the stealing from public funds account.
So the way I look at it is they're not understanding. The question is simple. George, why was your income $55,000 in 2020 and why is your income drastically higher? Well, here's the answer to that. We struck a deal with the company so nobody went unemployed and got reduced to like a very basic salary, just so we, as we called it, livable wages in the company, so we can get by, because our industry was capital introduction vis-a-vis conferences, vis-a-vis speed dating, all that in private equity, and managing limited partner, general partner relationships and investment groups. So long story short, I went from 2019 bringing in $400,000 and something to, in 2020 my reported income was $55K. It was, couldn't be more legitimate. I actually qualified for unemployment.
So it's interesting because the fact that he even spoke to this reporter at all, this was a few months ago, he hadn't been charged yet, but he was clearly under investigation. And so he's kind of fashioning himself, like his idol, Donald Trump, who thinks they can say and do anything and it's not going to come back to haunt them. But George Santos, this will certainly come back to haunt him. Now, it's interesting. The documentarian was a member of his district and said that's why he was interested in doing the story. But the reason why the documentary is not ever going to be seen is because George Santos said he wanted to get paid for the interview, so the project was dropped, because journalists don't pay for stories. It also shows how corrupt he is, because it may not have been ethical or legal for him to have gotten paid doing that as a member of Congress. So aside from that, let's talk about what he said in the tapes. Now, he really admits there that he made $55,000. He says how this was a reduction in his income, but that it made him qualify for unemployment. So just because you don't make that much doesn't qualify you for unemployment. If you are fired, then you can collect unemployment. You can't even collect unemployment if you resign, if you're fired. Certainly not if you still have your job, but you just happen to get paid less than you like. So right there, they're not going to have a hard time, honestly, proving this anyway, because there's documents around it. They know how much he got paid, and they know he filed for unemployment. The other interesting thing is the federal prosecutors in the indictment not only talk about this $55,000, they say that he got paid $125,000 from a Florida company that the SEC has accused of being a Ponzi scheme. So, even though 13 counts is like massive, especially, as I said, from an elected member of Congress, it is probably the tip of the iceberg here. Now, are we seeing Kevin McCarthy asking him to resign? No, of course not, because he needs his vote. And it shows how low he's willing to go to hold on to power. So in his interview after he gets indicted, he talks about how this is a witch hunt. I'm sorry, George Santos, but nobody cares about you enough to make this a witch hunt. But also he says that this is, during COVID, nobody really understood the rules. Well, unemployment doesn't really change because of COVID. But again, like, his lawyer would really wish he would stop talking, because that there is an admission that he did it. I mean, the federal government has not only his own federal disclosure forms he filed, but they have emails and they have texts a lot of this is documented. I don't think this is actually going to be a hard case for them to prove anyway. But then they have these tapes and they have this interview and him trying to say because of COVID, he didn't understand the federal rules. Yeah, sorry, that's not going to work. Okay, so he keeps going. So in the next clip, he talks about Matt Gaetz.
We just saw Matt Gaetz survive a massive scandal. He's elected. We see members of Congress survive scandal on scandal.
As he said, Matt Gaetz survived the scandal. I mean, Matt Gaetz didn't get criminally indicted like he did, but he certainly did survive the scandal. Is George Santos, wrong for thinking that the MAGA Republicans were going to stand by him? No. I mean, certainly Kevin McCarthy's not asking for him to resign. So he's not wrong. What he's wrong about is that the crimes he did were so obvious and so many that it's not just a scandal he's going to have to survive. It's literal jail time. He's facing up to 20 years for these 13 counts. And the one concession Kevin McCarthy did kind of make is that, he has the right to vote, but basically, how is that going to happen when he's in the middle of trial? The fact that he's not being asked to step aside by the GOP leadership is just stunning. The evidence against him is so bad, and he's supposed to be a public servant, but he says it himself. Hey, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter in a MAGA GOP day. It doesn't matter, and unfortunately, he's right. So then we see him go and talk about the money he made.
People flocked at me because I had a reputation already of being quick, aggressive, and good. And now I'm being held to, it feels really nice to make good money. But I had also previously, earlier in my career, had run into good fortune in business, So it's like people are attacking me for the slightest things.
Federal prosecutors have to love this clip, and this is going to be shown in trial to the jurors, and it's going to be great because at the end of the day, what they're claiming is that he said he set up a super PAC. Super PACs are allowed to accept money beyond the minimum donation and some donor donated quite a bit of money. One donated $25,000 because they thought they were donating to a super PAC. And sure enough, George Santos, instead of spending it on advertising, as he claimed in texts and emails, yes, the prosecutors have the receipts here, he spent it on designer clothes and paying off his personal debt. That is a crime. And it's such a serious crime because, we've talked a lot about how after Citizens United, the unlimited amount of money that's going into these elections and how much that just corrupts because money corrupts. But here you have somebody who's taken it so far that they've literally not even using it for politics, but for their own personal gain. So thank goodness the DOJ actually acted as quickly as they did. We've seen them drag their heels on things relating to Trump, but considering that George Santos was just elected in November and here we are early May and we already have an indictment, I feel grateful that they at least acted so quickly here. I think again, because the evidence is really so clear, so much of it is documented. And there was a person that he used also in soliciting these contributions, and the fact that the DOJ references this individual makes me think that that is probably a cooperating person, which will only make the case against George Santos even stronger. As he says, he quickly made money because it's easy to quickly make money. We see that Jack Smith is doing the same type of investigation against Donald Trump, that he raised money fraudulently from the public based on his election lies. It's similar, but a little bit different. But we absolutely need to put guardrails on the funneling of money and how politicians ask the money and how they use the money. But here's George Santos. under federal investigation, knowing exactly what he did. And he still can't help himself in a taped conversation to talk about and be proud of, actually, to brag about. Here it is, this reporter who he doesn't know. This isn't like some friendly donor conversation he's having that was secretly recorded. This is to some reporter who he doesn't know and who he thinks this is actually going to be publicized. I mean, he thinks this conversation is going to be publicized, and yet he still brags about how he so quickly made money, knowing how he quickly made money, how he just flat out lied about setting up a super PAC and took in a ton of money and used it to pay off his credit cards. And he thought he was so untouchable because of these MAGA Republicans, and that he was so above the law because he's managed to live a life never being held accountable, that he thought he could brag about literally stealing money from the public to go into his pocket just because he happened to run for an election for public office. And the fact that there's not an outcry from Republicans that this man, based on all the documents that they've seen referenced in this indictment, aren't asking for him to step down, is so disturbing. So I shouldn't be shocked, but it does. It still shock me that we, all of us, are not unwilling to have somebody like this represent us and do votes on important things like this debt ceiling that's coming up in a matter of weeks. And somebody so corrupt with these kind of really strong criminal indictment against him is going to make a decision that affects all of us. And it shouldn't just be Senator Romney out there calling for his resignation. It should be a resounding, if you do this, you shouldn't be able to act in our name. My name is Dina Sayegh Doll, reporting for MeidasTouch Network.
Hey Meidas Mighty, love this report? Continue the conversation by following us on Instagram @MeidasTouch to keep up with the most important news of the day. What are you waiting for? Follow us now.